It's too much, Maya. It's just too much. NHI's voice was strangely calm, almost gentle, which made the words infinitely more devastating. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't angry. He was stating a fact, a conclusion he had reached in the quiet, sterile waiting room while I was on the other side of the wall, fighting for my life and the lives of our 9 children. Annie looked at him from my hospital bed, my body a roadmap of pain and exhaustion. Just hours before, in a whirlwind of organized chaos, I had brought 9 tiny, perfect babies into the world. 9. A number that still felt like a dream. 9 heartbeats. 9 souls. 9 miracles that were, at that very moment, sleeping in a row of incubators in the NICU, their tiny chests rising and falling in a testament to the impossible. NMY's own heart, which should have been swelling with a joy so massive it eclipsed the pain, felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. "What is too much, Alex?" I whispered, my voice a raw, shredded thing. "The babies? The responsibility?" NHE had the grace to look away, his gaze falling on the window where the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in hues of pink and orange, heralding a new day that already felt like the end of my world. NHE ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a gesture I once found charmingly boyish. Now it just looked weak. "Everything," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "The noise, the cost, the sheer number of them. This isn't the life I signed up for, Maya. NTHE life I signed up for." The phrase hung in the air between us, thick and poisonous. He spoke as if our marriage, our future, our children, were a subscription service he could simply cancel when the terms no longer suited him. "They are our children, Alex," I said, a desperate, pleading note creeping into my voice. "Our blessings." NHE finally looked at me, and his eyes, the same eyes that had looked at me with such adoration on our wedding day, were now filled with a weary, defeated pity. It was the look you give a stranger who has suffered a terrible, random tragedy. "They're your blessings, Maya," he corrected me gently. "To me, they're an excuse. An excuse for you to forget about us. An excuse for me to be nothing more than a walking wallet for the next 20 years. An excuse for my entire life, my own dreams, to just end." NHE reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a plane ticket. A one-way flight to California, departing that afternoon. "My friend Mark has a startup out there," he said, his voice gaining a flicker of excitement, the first real emotion he had shown since the doctor had announced the 9th baby. "It's a chance to build something, to be someone. I can't do that here. Not with all this." NHE gestured vaguely towards the hallway, in the direction of the NICU, as if our 9 children were not miracles, but an insurmountable obstacle, a mountain of burden he refused to climb. NHE leaned down, kissed my forehead, a cold, brief press of lips that felt like a final seal on a coffin, and placed the plane ticket on my bedside table. "I'll send money," he said, as if that absolved him of everything. "I'm sorry, I just can't." And then he was gone. He walked out of my hospital room, out of the hospital, out of my life, and out of the lives of the 9 children he had helped create. He didn't run from them because he was cruel or evil. He ran because he was a coward. He had looked at a miracle, at 9 tiny, perfect reasons to become a better man, and had instead used them as 9 perfect excuses to run away and save himself. NIF, your heart is breaking right now. Please, don't go anywhere. Hit that subscribe button and show some love, because you need to see how a woman, left with 9 miracles and 1 man's cowardice, builds a new world from the ashes of a broken promise. NNA Lex was a dreamer. That was the first thing I loved about him. I was a pragmatist, an architect who dealt in blueprints, load-bearing walls, and the unyielding laws of physics. He was a graphic designer and aspiring artist who dealt in color, imagination, and the boundless possibilities of a blank canvas. He was the beautiful, chaotic art to my structured, stable design. NHE painted a picture of our future that was intoxicating, a life less ordinary. We wouldn't be tied down by a mortgage and a 9-to-5 job, he'd say. We'd travel, we'd create, we'd have a couple of kids maybe, and we'd raise them on the road, showing them the world, letting them be free spirits, just like him. Life is about experiences, Maya, not possessions. He'd tell me, his eyes shining with a passion that was impossible to resist. It's about the story we write.
I fell in love with his story. I fell in love with the idea of a life that broke free from the blueprints I was so used to. My parents, both accountants, were skeptical. "A dream doesn't pay the bills, honey," my father had warned. "Passion is wonderful, but stability is what builds a home." I ignored them. I was sure that my practicality and his creativity would be the perfect balance. We were two halves of a perfect whole. NFOR, the first few years. It worked. We lived in a small, trendy apartment downtown. I had a steady job at a respected architectural firm, and he took on freelance design projects, spending his afternoons painting canvases that were brilliant and vibrant but rarely sold. I was the foundation. He was the beautiful, ever-changing facade. I didn't mind. I believed in his talent. I was happy to be the stable ground from which his dreams could take flight. NTHE first sign that our blueprints didn't match came when I brought up the idea of starting a family in earnest. I was in my early 30s, and the quiet, steady desire for a child had begun to grow louder. Alex's reaction was lukewarm. "A baby? Now?" he'd said, a frown creasing his brow. "But we were going to spend a month in Thailand next year. A baby kind of complicates things, don't you think?" NTO him. A child was a complication, a logistical problem that interfered with the grand, unwritten story of his life. To me, a child was the next chapter. After months of gentle persuasion, he finally, reluctantly, agreed. "Okay," he'd said with a sigh. "One. But we have to promise we won't become one of those boring couples who only talks about diapers and sleep schedules." Getting pregnant was not easy. We struggled with infertility for 2 years, a painful, emotionally draining journey that Alex treated with a kind of detached impatience. The medical procedures, the rigid schedules, it was all an affront to his spontaneous, free-spirited nature. He saw it as my problem, my body's failure to cooperate with the one concession he had made to a conventional life. When we finally decided to try IVF, he was almost resentful. "I can't believe we have to resort to this," he'd muttered. "It's so clinical, so unnatural. NBUT, it worked. On our first attempt, I was pregnant, and the relief was so profound it felt like I could finally breathe again." The doctor, however, had a word of caution. "Given the number of embryos we transferred and your hormone levels, there's a high probability of multiples, Mrs. Thorne. We need to be prepared for that." Lex had laughed it off. "Twins? Cool, one of each, and we're done." Efficient. NHE had no idea. NTHE day of the first ultrasound, the technician's eyes went wide. She fell silent, her hand moving the wand back and forth, her brow furrowed in concentration. She called in a doctor, who in turn called in the head of the department. NMY heart was hammering. I was sure something was terribly wrong. NTHE department head, a woman with a calm, steady presence, finally turned to us. "Mr. and Mrs. Thorne," she said, her voice full of a kind of stunned reverence. "In my 30 years of practice, I have never seen this. You are pregnant with non-uplets. 9 NTHE, word didn't even compute. It was a number from mythology, not from an ultrasound in a suburban clinic." I started to laugh, a hysterical, breathless sound. Alex just stared, his face completely drained of color. "And 9? He repeated, the word sounding alien in his mouth. That's not possible. That's a litter." And in that single, horrified word, I saw it. He wasn't looking at a miracle. He was looking at the death of his dream. The beautiful, unwritten story of his life of freedom and travel had just been replaced by a terrifying saga of overwhelming, inescapable responsibility. And he was already looking for an editor to write him out of it. NNTHE pregnancy became a full-time job and a medical spectacle. I was immediately put on bed rest, my world shrinking to the confines of our small apartment. The story of the Oak Creek 9 went viral. Our lives were no longer our own, and Lex, to my surprise, seemed to rally at first. He stepped into the role of the doting, slightly overwhelmed, but charming father-to-be. He gave interviews to morning shows, his artist's charm translating perfectly to the screen. He spoke eloquently about the beautiful chaos that was about to enter our lives, framing it as the ultimate creative challenge. "It's like we're not just creating a family, we're creating a whole village," he'd say, with a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. He was performing. He was turning our reality into a story he could control, a narrative where he was the charismatic, unconventional hero facing an extraordinary situation. Donations poured in. A local car dealership gifted us a massive passenger van. A baby supply company promised a lifetime supply of diapers. The community rallied around us, seeing the story Alex was selling. The cool, artistic couple blessed with an impossible, wonderful miracle. NBUT behind the closed doors of our apartment. The performance would end. The moment the reporters left, his smile would vanish, replaced by a look of quiet, suffocating panic. He would retreat to his studio for hours, not to paint, but to stare at a blank canvas, the weight of our new reality pressing down on him. "NTHE blessings" became his excuses. "I can't finish this painting," he'd say, gesturing to a half-finished canvas. "How can I concentrate with all this baby stuff everywhere?" The donated boxes of cribs and car seats that filled our living room were, to him, an invasion of his creative space. I had to turn down that freelance gig from the city. He'd sigh, running a hand through his hair. "The deadline is too tight, and I need to be available for you." His tone made it clear that my needs and the needs of our 9 unborn children were a burden, a chain holding him back from his professional ambitions. NHE started talking about his dreams in the past tense. "I always wanted to live in a loft in Brooklyn," he'd say wistfully. "Guess that's never going to happen now." And every blessing, every donation, every offer of help, he twisted into another brick in the wall of his prison. The new van wasn't a gift. It was a symbol of the suburban life he despised. The diapers weren't a relief. They were a reminder of the messy, unglamorous reality that was coming. Our 9 children were no longer children. They were the 9 nails in the coffin of his freedom. I tried to talk to him, to reach him. "Alex, we can do this." I'd plead from my bed. "It will be hard, but it will be amazing. We'll be a team." "You don't get it, Maya," he'd say, his voice flat. "Your dream is coming true. You get the house, the kids, the whole package. What about my dream? When do I get to live my life?" It was a question so profoundly selfish, so breathtakingly narcissistic, that it left me speechless. He saw our children not as a shared creation, but as my personal project, one that was infringing upon his own. NTHE day, I was admitted to the hospital for the final, most critical weeks of the pregnancy. He drove me. We sat in silence for the entire ride. As he helped me into the wheelchair at the entrance, he looked at me, his eyes full of a strange, distant sorrow. "And I'm proud of you, Maya," he said. "You're strong. You can handle this." And at the time, I thought it was a rare moment of encouragement. I didn't realize until later what it really was. It was a transfer of responsibility. It was his justification. It was goodbye. NNTHE birth was a blur of bright lights, beeping machines, and a sea of masked faces. It was a medical triumph, a perfectly executed plan to bring 9 fragile lives into the world safely. One by one they arrived, their names a litany of hope I had whispered to them in the lonely nights. Asher, Caleb, Noah, Levi, Finn, Owen, Jasper, Milo, and little Ilara, the only girl, my tiny, fierce surprise. Anna Lex was in the room, a silent, pale figure in the corner. He watched the proceedings with the detached air of a spectator at a sporting event he didn't understand. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just watched. And when it was over and the last baby had been whisked away to the NICU, a nurse patted his arm. "Congratulations, Dad. You have 9 beautiful children." N.A. Lex just nodded, his face a blank mask. He mumbled something about needing some air and slipped out of the room. NTHAT was the last I saw of him until he appeared in my hospital room hours later, the rising sun at his back and a plane ticket in his hand. NHI's departure was not a dramatic, angry explosion. It was a quiet, deliberate act of self-preservation. He delivered his speech about his dreams, about the startup in California, about how he just couldn't do this. He framed his abandonment as a noble, albeit painful, quest for personal fulfillment. Our 9 children, our 9 miracles, were the unfortunate but necessary collateral damage in the story of his life. And after he left, a nurse came in to check on me. She saw the plane ticket on the bedside table. She saw the look on my face. She didn't need to ask what had happened. She sat on the edge of my bed, took my hand, and said something I will never forget. "Some men run into a fire to save their family," she said, her voice soft but fierce. "And some men run away from a warm house because they're afraid of getting burned by the responsibility. The problem was never you, honey. It was him." NHER words were a tiny anchor in the swirling vortex of my shock and grief. NTHE news of his departure spread through the hospital like wildfire, then out into the world. The narrative he had so carefully crafted of the cool, artistic dad shattered. The media, which had built him up, now delighted in tearing him down. He became a symbol of modern-day cowardice, the runaway dad of the decade. NHI's parents, horrified and ashamed, came to the hospital. They apologized, they cried, they promised to help in any way they could. They couldn't understand. He was always a dreamer. His mother sobbed, but we never thought his dreams were more important than his own children. I was alone in a hospital bed, my body torn apart, my heart shattered, and my future now an overwhelming, terrifying question mark with 9 tiny, dependent parts. He had used our blessings as his excuse to leave. Now I had to make them my reason to fight. NNTHE first few weeks were a battle for survival, fought on 2 fronts. In the NICU, my 9 tiny angels fought for every breath, their fragile bodies hooked up to a web of wires and tubes. In my own heart, I fought against the crushing weight of despair. And every morning, my father would drive me to the hospital, and every evening he would drive me back to my parents' house, where I was now living. I couldn't face the apartment I had shared with Alex, a space that now felt like a museum of broken promises. NTHE world saw me as a victim, a tragic figure. But in the quiet, sterile world of the NICU, surrounded by the quiet strength of the nurses and the fierce, silent fight of my children, I began to feel something else, a slow, burning resolve. And I was an architect. I built things. My life's work was to take an empty space and create something strong, functional, and beautiful. My own life was now an empty space, a demolished lot. It was time to draw up a new blueprint. NTHE first line I drew was a line of defense. I hired a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who was disgusted by Alex's story. We filed for divorce and sole custody. We froze our joint accounts, securing the donation money for the children. When Alex's first guilt-ridden check arrived from California, we cashed it, and my lawyer sent a curt, professional letter outlining the astronomical child support he would be legally obligated to pay for the next 18 years. His dream of freedom was about to get very, very expensive. NTHE's second line I drew was a foundation of support. I let people in. My parents were my rock. My brother flew in from across the country and stayed for a month. The nurses from the NICU became my surrogate sisters. And the community, seeing me not as a crumbling victim, but as a determined mother, redoubled their efforts. And a local contractor, a man my father knew, heard about my situation. He came to my parents' house one evening, hat in hand. "Ma'am," he said, his voice gruff but kind, "I own a piece of land on the edge of town. It's not much, but it's big enough. My crew and we'd like to build you a house. No charge. You're an architect. You design it, we'll build it." And tears streamed down my face. It was an act of kindness so profound, so unexpected, it felt like a miracle in its own right. NSO. I did what I do best. I designed. I poured all my grief, my anger, and my hope into that blueprint. I designed a house that was not a monument to one man's ego, but a home built for a family. It was practical, accessible, and full of light. It had a massive kitchen, a playroom that opened onto a safe, fenced-in yard, and 9 small, cozy bedrooms. It was a house designed for a beautiful, chaotic village, and as my babies grew stronger in the hospital, my house grew taller on that plot of land. Both were being built by a community, by the kindness of strangers and the love of family. Alex had tried to run away from the story of his life. I was busy building a new one from the ground up. And 5 years passed. 5 years of beautiful, relentless, exhausting chaos. My house, the house that kindness built, was a hive of constant activity. It was a world of scraped knees, mismatched socks, potty training, and the 9 distinct, wonderful personalities of my children. Asher was the serious, thoughtful leader. Caleb was the wild, fearless adventurer. Noah, the gentle animal lover. Levi, the quiet bookworm. Finn, the boisterous comedian. Owen, the sensitive artist. Jasper, the curious scientist. Milo, the charming diplomat. And Ilara, my only girl, was the fierce, tiny queen who ruled over her 8 devoted brothers. I had gone back to work, starting my own small architectural firm from an office I built in my home. I specialized in designing accessible, family-friendly spaces. My life was my portfolio. NWE were a team, a loud, messy, loving, self-sufficient team. The story of Alex, the runaway dad, had faded. We were now the Thorn 9, a local curiosity and a symbol of resilience. He was a ghost, a name on a child support check that arrived every month, a man whose dreams had led him to a life of hollow freedom on the other side of the country. And then, one sunny Saturday afternoon, the ghost appeared on my doorstep. NHE looked diminished. The vibrant artistic energy was gone, replaced by the weary restlessness of a man who has been running for a long time and has nowhere left to go. His clothes were expensive, but his eyes were empty. "Maya," he said, his voice hesitant, and I stepped outside, closing the door firmly behind me, shielding my children from the sight of him. "Alex, what are you doing here?" "I came to see them," he said, gesturing towards the house. "I saw an article about you online." "About the house?" "About everything. You've done an amazing job." "I did what I had to do," I said, my voice flat. "You left me no choice." NHE had the decency to flinch. "I know. I was a coward. I was a fool." "I see that now." He took a deep breath, launching into a speech he had clearly rehearsed. "My startup failed. My art never went anywhere. This life I chased. It's empty, Maya. I was wrong. My dream wasn't in California. It was here. It was always here. With you. With them." NHE looked at me, his eyes pleading. "I want to come home. I want to be a father. It's not too late, is it?" And I almost laughed. It was a question so naive, so profoundly ignorant of the reality of the last 5 years, that it was absurd. He thought he could just write himself back into the story, inserting himself into the epilogue after having torn out the most important chapters. "You think you can just walk back in?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "You think the role of father is a job that's been held open for you? That role has been filled, Alex. It's been filled by my father, who taught your sons how to throw a baseball. It's been filled by my brother, who taught them how to ride a bike. It's been filled by the men in this community who have been their role models. You are not a missing piece. You are a stranger." From the backyard, I heard a shriek of laughter. It was Finn, chasing Ilara around the swing set. Alex's eyes darted towards the sound, a look of desperate longing on his face. "Please, Maya," he whispered. "Just let me meet them." "No," I said, the word a solid, immovable wall. "They are happy. They are whole. They don't need a father who will only love them when his other dreams fail. They deserve more than being someone's consolation prize. My blessings are not your safety net." And I looked at this man, this dreamer who had run from the greatest adventure of his life. I didn't feel anger anymore. I just felt a profound, bottomless pity. He hadn't just abandoned his children. He had abandoned the best version of himself. "You made your choice 5 years ago, Alex," I said, my voice softening with a finality that was absolute. "You chose the dream of a life without them. The kindest thing you can do now is let them live theirs without you." And I turned, walked back into my loud, chaotic, beautiful home, and locked the door, leaving him alone on the outside with nothing but his excuses. NHI's appearance was not an ending. It was a disruption, a stone tossed into the calm waters of the life I had so carefully built. He didn't just go away, he sued. He petitioned the court for visitation rights, for a legal acknowledgement of his paternity, for a chance to quote, rectify his past mistakes. NTHE legal battle was a painful public rehashing of his abandonment. His lawyer portrayed him as a repentant man who had suffered a temporary, albeit prolonged, breakdown under the immense pressure of an extraordinary circumstance. He argued that a child's life is always better with 2 parents, regardless of the past. Knew we. My lawyer argued that Alex was a biological father, but not a parent. A parent, she stated, is a verb. A parent is an action. A parent is present. NTHE court ordered a psychological evaluation for Alex and a series of interviews with the children by a court-appointed therapist. My children, now old enough to understand, were confused and unsettled. Why does he want to see us now? Asher, my serious, thoughtful son, asked me. He didn't want us when we were babies. I think he's lonely, sweetheart, I answered honestly, and I think he regrets the choice he made. But that was his choice, Alara said, her 5-year-old face set with a fierce, unshakable logic. He can't unchoose it now. That's not how choices work. And in the end, the judge's decision was a masterpiece of legal and emotional wisdom. NHE looked at Alex, his expression not unkind, but firm. "Mr. Thorne, your desire to connect with your children now is understandable. However, it is a desire born of your own needs, not theirs. You are, in essence, asking 9 children to heal a wound in you that you inflicted upon yourself." NHE granted Alex the legal title of father, something that was an undeniable biological fact. He ordered the continuation of his substantial child support payments. But on the matter of visitation, he was unequivocal. Parenthood is a relationship built over time through shared experience and consistent presence, the judge stated. You cannot force such a relationship into existence. Therefore, visitation will not be mandated. It will be at the sole discretion of the children themselves to be decided if and when they are ready, once they are old enough to make such a decision without undue influence. NHE was giving the power back to my children. He was telling Alex that he could not force his way back into their lives. He had to earn it, and he could only begin to do that if they, one day, chose to let him. It was a victory, but a quiet one. It closed the legal door on his intrusion, leaving the personal one for my children to manage in their own time. Lex left the courtroom looking defeated. The law, like me, had refused to give him a shortcut back to the family he had thrown away. He had wanted to rewrite his story. But the judge had made it clear. The story was no longer his to write. And NWE never heard from Alex directly again. The child support checks continued to arrive, a silent, monthly reminder of the man who chose to be a bank account instead of a father. NMY children grew, their 9 lives intertwining to create a rich, complex, and beautiful tapestry. They were a team, a force of nature, fiercely protective of each other and of me. They were athletes and artists, scholars and comedians, dreamers and pragmatists. They were everything. As they grew into teenagers, they became aware of their own story, of the man who was their biological father. They were curious, but it was a distant, academic curiosity. They would sometimes look him up online, finding pictures of a lonely-looking man in his 50s, standing in front of paintings in a sterile-looking art gallery. When Asher, my eldest, turned 18, I gave him a box of letters. They were from Alex, sent over the years to a P.O. box my lawyer had set up. I had never opened them, but I had saved them. And this is your choice now, I told him. All of you. If you want to read them, if you want to reach out, that is your decision. I will support you no matter what. nine of them sat together in the living room and read the letters. They were filled with regret, with excuses dressed up as explanations, with a longing for a life he had willingly discarded. And after a long, quiet discussion, they made a decision. Together, they wrote one letter back. It was short, simple, and devastatingly final. It said, Dear Mr. Thorne, NT, thank you for your letters. We understand that you regret your decision. We hope you have found the life you were looking for. We have, sincerely, NTHE, Thorne 9. They chose their story. And he wasn't in it. They were not his second chance, not his redemption arc. They were their own complete, beautiful, chaotic story. One evening, I was sitting on the porch of the house that kindness built, watching my incredible, nearly grown children laughing and arguing over a game of cards. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow on their faces. Noah, my artist, came and sat beside me. He had Alex's eyes, but his were filled with a warmth and empathy his father had never possessed. Mom, he said, looking out at his siblings, do you ever think about what would have happened if he had stayed? And I thought for a moment. I pictured Alex here, his restless energy, his suffocating self-pity, his dreams always taking precedence over their needs. Yes, I said softly. I think about it sometimes. Would it have been better? He asked, his voice quiet. I looked at the 9 miracles before me, at the unbreakable bond they shared, at the love that filled every corner of our home, a love built not on a single man's dream, but on the foundation of 1,000 acts of kindness. No, sweetheart, I said, my heart full of a certainty that was absolute. It would have been a different story, and I wouldn't trade our story for anything. NHE had used our blessings as his excuse to leave, but he had been wrong. They were never his to begin with. They were mine, they were ours, and they were the reason for everything.